Hi guys, welcome to the Revive Stronger podcast. I'm your host as always, Steve Hall, and I am joined today by Eric Helms. So Eric, if not many of you have been aware, has just been competing this season, and that is something that I really want to dig into with Eric today because I think it's really interesting to hear someone who has competed many times before and has also taken many people to stage, but it's been quite a while since your last competitive outing, hasn't it, Eric?
Yeah, eight years away from the stage. So I did 07 season, 09 season, 2011. But before we get into that, thank you for having me, sir. It's glad to be back on Revive Stronger, and just appreciate the opportunity to talk about myself as always.
Yeah, this is going to be all about Eric. So this is going to be a nice, like all about yourself, Eric. And no, always our pleasure to have you on. And I'm glad we could make this happen and let people know kind of your recent competitive outing where was it again? In Hawaii? No.
It was in Hawaii.
Yeah.
I'm actually rocking the shirt right now.
Nice.
It's the Polynesian Muscle Mayhem. It is a INBF show. I think it's been around for a couple of years now. It's a smaller show just because of the location. I think it's difficult to get a lot of competitors out to Hawaii, but they do a really fantastic job of putting on the show, and I can just encourage anyone. It's very well ran. The lighting is well done. The judging is very fair. It's ran like a show that is attended by 3 times as many people, and I think it'd be really cool if it had 3 times as many attended people. So it's also early in the season, so April. So it's, kind of one of those shows where maybe people aren't in condition yet. But if you are competing in an early show, I can highly recommend it from personal experience. But yeah, anyway, so also good excuse for a vacation after your show.
Oh, yeah.
If you really want to ruin your transition to the off season. So lots of good food in Hawaii. So yeah. That was my first show, April 6th, INBF Muscle Mayhem.
And to give the listeners like an understanding of why there was such a big gap since your last competitive season, why was that? I think that would be quite valuable for people to hear.
For sure. So my 2011 season I did during my first Masters. I was also teaching 30 hours a week. I had a full roster with 3DMJ. And I was also working on my proposal for my second Masters, which I did in AUT. And we were getting our entire life ready to move because we flew out end of August 2012 to move to New Zealand to start my second Masters in PhD. And I've said before on other podcasts that people typically don't have an issue with time management. It's energy management. Like you always have a few more hours in the day. This was a period in my life where that actually was not the case, where I legitimately on a day-to-day basis, when I wasn't studying, doing cardio, training. I was also doing some personal training still. I still had about three or four clients that I was doing in person. So in-person personal training, teaching classes, building classes, grading or doing admin, writing my proposal, or something, coaching my 3DMJ athletes. I had about 3 hours per day that weren't allocated. So that was, eating and sitting down to watch Netflix with my wife for, a couple hours. I was fortunate, at least in the earlier part of the year, that she was dieting for some powerlifting meets and also tried her hand at a figure show. So through May, we got to do our cardio together and train together and all that. So that allowed us some kind of semblance of connection. But man, from like June through August, for those 3 months, it was, I looked at it, it's like, this isn't the way to live life, and I did a good job. Like I was able to get a 4.0 in my Masters, and I won the second show I did, the second of my 2 shows. And that was where I got, like PMBA pro qualified in that organization. So it objectively went well, but I think both suffered in some way. Everything suffered a little bit when you're that busy. And it made me, I pledged to myself that once I went to New Zealand and started my research-based part of my graduate studies, that I would not get back on stage that I would have to resign myself to powerlifting and eventually weightlifting, which was cool too. Sort of. I don't know if it counts. I mean, I completed a meet, but it's not good. I resigned myself to going, right, you can do strength sport that requires you doing a max test on a day, but no dieting until you're done with your PhD, which didn't come until I graduated in December 2017. So sometime nearing the end of my PhD data collection in 2016, when I kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel, that's when I started planning and engaging in the initial steps, which led me to here.
It's fascinating to me. Well, not fascinating, but it's shocking to me when you said 2012 is when you moved to New Zealand, because I was like, it doesn't feel like you've moved that long ago. I can remember when you made the move, and it really doesn't feel that long ago. So time has flown. It's crazy.
It is crazy, man. I was reflecting today. I was trying to figure out how many powerlifting meets I'd done, and I was going back and trying to find the old American Powerlifting Association records from California in 2007. And websites are a lot better these days.
And out of interest, Eric, how's it been? Because it's been such a long time since you competed before. Is there anything that you immediately felt kind of changed in competing and also your approach?
The funny thing is, it has been a lot better this time, I think, because of the time away from stage. And I'll explain why. When I moved to New Zealand, I also said, you know what, I don't need to be tracking my macros every day. Yeah, the way I have been, and weighing when I'm at home and estimating when I'm out and having numbers that I'm targeting to hit. And I started to realize that by having my primary and principal rule of I'm going to hit these three numbers, I was actually preventing myself from developing a lot of consistent, habit-based, automatic strategies. And anyone who wants to read more about that can check out the 3DMJ blog, the default diet, and then the one I wrote after that. I think it's a question-based title, is tracking inhibiting your nutritional growth? And that's obviously that question the answer was yes for me. And that's because I was kind of freestyle IIFYM approaching it for a long time. I was fortunate in 2011 that I was just so damn busy that I ended up having a very, very consistent eating schedule and being very structured and buying the same foods and eating them and having far less decisions to make or time to focus on food. Because I think that unintentionally built some of the structure that I had at the time. So when I moved to New Zealand and I stopped tracking macros, and I learned that I can pretty effortlessly maintain, gain, or lose weight, at least, until I get really lean and I get hungry. And by just kind of modifying some basic structural approaches without tracking, and that just by looking at food, I can almost always tell the portion size, unless it's some kind of weird mixed meal that I'm not used to or a food I'm not familiar with. I realized how much I was getting in my own way. And I found that I was able to, when I did finally do a quote unquote bulk, if you will, I moved from around 90 to 93 kilos up to around 98 to 100 kilos over about a year and a half, from late 2016 to early 2018. And that was one of the leaner bulks I'd done. I think because I was better matching up my energy surplus on a day-to-day basis with my actual expenditure, because I was very aware of my hunger and satiety and lethargy and fullness, all the little things that I was supplanting with tracking. And I'm not anti-tracking. It's just that you don't want tracking to replace your body awareness or your nutritional awareness. You want it to supplement it. And I think in many ways I was using it as a replacement. I don't have to worry about satiety or hunger. I'm a slave to the numbers. My body's a machine. I'm here to fuel it. And instead of realizing that I had the super complex, biological help here, the whole senses that we have and my entire, physiology was geared towards being aware of what its energy needs were. And I was eschewing that, if you will. So anyway, I think one of the things that made this a lot easier prep was that I had literally 8 years of habit-based development, not tracking, being more aware of my hunger, paying attention to correlations between performance and eating, And the modifications I made to my nutrition plan were largely based on swapping out, full or low fat items for non-fat, replacing starchy carbohydrates with vegetables, and reducing the oils, things like that. Swapping out higher calorie fruits for lower calorie fruits, and focusing on protein based meals like I was, but just with leaner protein sources. Sprinkle in a very small amount of cardio, and kind of have like a high day, low day structure. And I didn't even need to track for the first 9 weeks of my official diet start. And I didn't start actually whipping out the scale and Fit Genie until I was 6 weeks out, and arguably decent stage condition already. So it was, I think that made it a lot easier, a lot less decisions to make, for sure.
That's really interesting. And in line with that, were you monitoring your body weight, or was that something you weren't doing?
Absolutely. So yeah, that's a great example of being aware of your body, but using biofeedback to make decisions. So I was weighing in daily, cool. And I also, another thing is that with all those habits formed, it allowed me to start leaner at the beginning of prep, leaner than I ever have for a prep. And basically finding that sweet spot where I'm not, I don't have diet fatigue, but I'm also as lean as I can be without diet fatigue, or at least where I think I was. So I started my prep right around like 89.5 kilos. And that was me eating without any intention to maintain, or I wasn't restricted. Let's put it that way. I had done a mini cut in April, and then another one in September, October, to get down to around 88. I think I even hit 87. I was traveling and just under eating. And then I was hungry when I got back. So I ate habitually and got up to around 88, 89. And then I was holding there until December 18th when I started. And if you look at the IG pics I put up, I'd say I was probably like a legit, maybe 11, 12% body fat to start my prep, somewhere in there, which was a really great starting point for me. I was actually shocked at just like, man, I look like I've been dieting, and I haven't been. That's pretty cool, because when I started my prep, the last few times I was 5 to 10 pounds heavier each time, and then another increment. Like I started, I think my first prep way back in the day at like 215 pounds, which is like, I don't know, what is that? 98, 97, something like that. So yeah, anyway, but like a full 8 to 9 kilos heavier, which is why I was able to get on stage after a 15-week diet, when previously in 2011, I got on stage after a 32-week diet. So, which was nice. And I took a diet break in week 6 or 7 of dieting. I took a diet break, and I had a 2-day or 3-day refeed every week, except for a digging phase right in the end, where we would kind of do it more auto-regulated, where I'd pop in 2 or 3 days once I hit a new low, or once we saw a visual change. But for the most part, on average, only 5 out of every 7 days was a dieting day. And then 1 out of the 15 weeks that I was dieting was completely off. So on average, I was only dieting like 2/3 of the time that I was in prep for 15 weeks, which I think is pretty cool. So I think all of those factors went into it. And I might have forgotten what your original question was, because I tangented myself. You answered it, because it was a case of what was different this time dieting versus last time, and being at the lower end of I guess it's lower end of your settling point is kind of a way you could describe the position you got yourself down to, then rid of any kind of diet fatigue, and I guess the anxiety behind the numbers and the poor habits, an element of diet fatigue, I guess you could call it. So you just put yourself in a really good, strong position to start a contest prep this time around. Yeah. Oh, you asked me if I was weighing myself. So yes. Yeah. That's an important point, is I think when I say I wasn't tracking, a lot of people will be like, well, so you didn't control calorie. How do you know what you were eating? Yeah. Or how do you know if you were progressing? And I think it's really important to know that I can't not know what my calorie intake is, especially based on foods that I've been eating like for 8 years. Not that I have no variation in it, but it's like I have some pretty solid habits in place. So I'm aware of my calorie intake, but I would let my calories be higher or lower based on how hungry or satiated I was. I'm not going to like not eat enough protein or something like that. But if I've been roughly eating 1,800 calories, but it's an off day, I've been sedentary the whole time, I'm not hungry, I don't even feel like I need an additional meal, I might just have there were nights where I just drank some pasteurized egg whites and went to bed, and I was like, all right, let me hit a gram per pound of protein and I'm done. And that put me at like 1,500 calories, even though my target was 1,800, because why not? And I could just tell that I wasn't burning as many that day. I didn't feel lethargic despite being on lower calories. I wasn't hungry. Sleep wasn't disturbed. I didn't look flat. Performance the next day was fine, that kind of thing. And not more importantly, but equally as importantly, getting on the scale every day, you can kind of get a sense of what's going on, especially if your nutrition habits are consistent. So I was essentially using both quantitative and qualitative biofeedback, in addition to the inability to not know how many calories I was eating. So I was always aware. And then how far I would modify the calories would be based on all those qualities. And I could say on average, I was eating probably 23 to 2,500 calories on my refeeds at the start, and I was dieting on around 1,800 on my low days. And that worked pretty damn well I want to say I didn't hit a stall for the first 4 to 5 or 6 weeks. And then I slotted in a couple cardio sessions per week that I say were cardio sessions, but then, if I'd actually done 2 cardio sessions a week for those last 10 weeks, I would have said I'd done 20 cardio sessions, but I only ended up doing 9. So that's very few. And it's largely because I wasn't doing like hard cardio. I was just attempting to offset any reductions in energy expenditure, right? So if a scheduled cardio day came around, but I had a meeting in the city that I walked to, and then I walked back, and then I had to go grocery shopping, I'm like, well, I'm not going to do cardio now. I basically did it. And that ended up happening more often than not. Or I would just intentionally do things like, take the stairs, walk to the grocery store, carry the groceries back from the grocery store, which is actually a decent walk. And I would sneak in my cardio in that way. So formal cardio sessions only 9, but I did start doing cardio at that point. That was the second adjustment. Then I took the diet break, came back, got some more life out of that same setup. And then in the last 6 weeks of my diet, I had to make changes every week or every other week until I got down pretty low. But yeah, it was very smooth sailing throughout. And I also was getting skin fold assessments done every couple of weeks, which I find from an ISAC anthropometrist who's a PhD student at AUT. So it's not like I don't like most body fat assessments. And people ask me, "Oh, you got skin folds. What was your body fat?" I'm like, I'm not going to use skin folds to determine body fat. That's a terrible idea. But guess what? A skin fold is a very accurate measurement of a skin fold. So, and that's what we care about as bodybuilders is how much distance is there between our eyes and the muscle. So it was cool to see my skin folds track down, and I'm actually going to start up doing that again this Sunday.
Nice. A lot of things you were talking about there, Eric, is just making me think, if you were my client, I feel like you might be a nightmare. Just in the fact of a lot of the things you were talking about is needed. Like you have to be very sure that you're advanced in many of these areas of knowledge and application and being able to I was just thinking if a client was like chucking these things at me, he was like, oh, I didn't do my cardio today because I went for this walk. And I'm like, hang on, this is really hard to control. So do you want to touch a bit on like the fact that you've got all this experience and potentially, I don't know, in your past seasons, you wouldn't have been able to do such modifications on the fly as such?
Yeah, I think this is something you have to learn as a coach too, is that the way you coach someone who is a highly advanced bodybuilder, and I don't mean advanced like, oh, they're going to place really high, because there's some people who are 23 who are going to win, but someone who's highly experienced and has been intentional and aware and has improved upon their own process during that time is very different than the way you coach a first-time competitor or even someone who's in, say, their second or third season. Like you, my standard, based on the fact that 90% of I would say, I did math one time, I think roughly 300 people I've helped get on stage. So 90% of them, so we're talking 200 plus of those people were early stage intermediates, novices, or late stage intermediates is what I would qualify them as, going into their second or third season most of the time, with a lot of first timers. And in those cases, I'm giving a plus or minus 5 to 10 gram target on macros. I'm giving them specific resistance training program. They're going to track sets, reps, and loads. And given specific high days, specific low days, X number of calories I want them to burn per week, and then daily weigh-ins. And they have a specific day of the week that they report in on. And I ask them to do a video, ideally if they can, voice message if they can't, or written email if none of those work. And ideally video their physique going through the mandatory poses, and or pictures if they can't do that. I give them 1 to 2 things on their posing to fix each week, because they can't take on too many things learning on board. I look at their training to see if it's progressing. I ask for certain lifts to be seen that are high risk, ask how their performance is going. I get RPE. Like I know exactly what I want, which variables I want, and what I do with them. And that's the way it goes for novices and intermediates. And then that changes on an individual basis over time. Like, for example, they might have certain things like, hey, during exam week, this really, really messes me up. And you go, hey, all right, we're not going to weigh in during exam week, and I want that to be our deloads. Or someone else might have a really odd rotating work schedule that kind of messes up their weigh-ins or their food or whatever. And we go, right, we're going to have auto-regulated refeed days. So long as you get 2 in per week, I'm happy. But what day of the week, I don't care. Just so long as out of every 7 days, 5 are dieting days. So you end up creating these kind of ad hoc modifications to that basic structure of coaching. But you have to be more flexible than that with an advanced athlete. And in many times, the way to approach it is you let them be the gatekeeper. Unless they come to you and they go, hey, look, I want your structure. Treat me like any other client. And then you just have to make sure that you don't get in their way, that you include them even though you start with that structure. And that does happen. Sometimes I get the high-level athlete who goes, look, I haven't been as successful as I want. I don't trust my approach, so let me do the 3DMJ way. And we start there and then work their individuality into it. But to give you an example of what it might look like for a high-level athlete, with Berto, I brought him on to be like officially doing coaching, and him having kind of the final say, unless we totally disagreed, which hasn't really ever happened, right around the 6 weeks out mark. And he knew what I was doing beforehand. He endorsed it. He liked it. He thought it was working really well. Obviously, I would have reached out if it hadn't been. And he wanted to see, videos of me in front natural lighting after all of my low days, along with basically a report of how things are going, performance, etc. And one of the first things he did was he told me after one of my series of 2 refeeds, you don't look like you had refeeds. You still look flat to me. I want you to go out and eat more tonight. And then the next week he was like, actually, I want you to have 3 refeed days in a row. And I realized that I was very, very, very focused on, am I getting leaner? Right. And whatever, I'll do the refeeds and I won't pay attention to it. So I was essentially over dieting a little bit, and Berto caught that earlier than I would have. I think it would have taken me to like one day look up and go like, hey, you look small as shit, like too late kind of thing, or to see performance drop. So things like that, even though I'm experienced, I am going to get tunnel vision at some point, as I did. And to have that kind of input, it's a very different setup. So your structure of coaching needs to change based on the level of the athlete. A powerlifting example is me working with Bryce right now. He reports in regularly, either once or every other week, depending on kind of where he's at and where he's at mentally too. And then I write him a block of training, and I go, let me know what you think. And he gives me like a block review and some block alterations at the beginning of it. And then on any given day, I can get a message from Bryce, and he'll say, hey, here are some thoughts on what did or didn't happen. I want to make some changes. And that could be me talking him down from a ledge and saying, hey, you're kind of, I think you're focused too much on the day here. Or that could be, we completely alter the taper and we have to start it multiple days early. So I think you do an advanced lifter a disservice if they've been paying attention and if they're actually a coachable athlete, not just someone who's really stubborn and locked in their way, if you don't incorporate all those things. And that does actually make it harder on the coach. That's a more difficult skill set, in my opinion. Like when I first worked with some advanced lifters, I think I probably held them back just because I'm like, well, look, I need to see, like, I want to make a change, and I don't know if the change worked if I don't know that you hit all your macros within 5 grams, you know? But if I was coaching me, you know, back when I was like that, and I looked up and I said, hey, Eric, listen, buddy, we lost the right amount of weight this week. I look better. I recognize that I am 100 calories over on some days and 100 calories under on other days, and that I skipped cardio this week. But the whole reason we're managing those variables is to get the progress that we already got. And my performance is holding up. I look good. I'm improving in every way possible. So maybe you just take the stick out of your ass, you know, and we can set up a different system here. But that's hard to do, you know. I think all of those systems we put in place, not only do they give us utility as coaches, they also give us confidence, and to know that, you know, in this world where we really don't actually get to see the person physically, we don't see 95% of what's going on in their life. We can at least, you know, plant our anchor of confidence in this Excel spreadsheet and these videos we get every 7 days. And I think that is a bit of a kind of a false sense of confidence, and it's good to shake that up every once in a while and understand that it is a, you know, a push and pull with a true human out there who is going to be able to intuit, see, and engage with much more than you ever possibly can. And while it's great for an early stage novice who has no experience and doesn't know what it's going to be like for the coming weeks, to be able to basically borrow your confidence in your system, the true way to unlock the best performance in an athlete is to get them more in tune with their own self-awareness. But it's hard to facilitate in online coaching relationships, but you have to be open to it when you work with an advanced lifter.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate those comments. And I think that's the beauty of having the video feedback, or at least the voice notes and things like this as a coach. Whereas, I don't know, there's a lot of online coaches that just heavily rely on email, and I'm not sure that's the easiest platform to communicate effectively in that way. So I really appreciate you guys do that. And I've certainly found value in our own online coaching systems where we're using that, because a lot of the people I coach, they're coaches themselves. They know, like you said, people know their bodies almost better than you know them when they're at that level. So you have to take their input, especially if you haven't coached them for that long. You don't know them that well. So yeah, I think that was a really valuable discussion, Eric.
Thanks, man. Yeah, email, it's funny. This is totally off topic, but email I think is very alluring because you can see it all. You can take your time. You can write it down. It's unfiltered. You can see the tree. There's some logistical benefits. You can see everything that was said. But man, like, there's a reason why the nastiest political debates and straw man arguments happen in text. It's because people are removed from treating each other like people. Like, you don't see someone's face. You don't see connotation or hand gestures. You don't hear tone of voice. And it just removes so many critical elements of communication. And man, when you see someone who's saying they're good to go and their eyes are half shut and they're just sucked up and you have to put them on 2 times speed just to hear everything they're saying in some kind of reasonable cadence. And you're like, yeah, your NEAT is down, bro. You know? So I think you lose all those things when you don't get some of that more natural communication.
100%. And actually, on that topic of NEAT, did you track steps or did you do anything with your NEAT to monitor that?
No, I haven't done that. I think I've considered it, and I might, but I also don't want my life to become calorie burning so much. I've done it more subjectively, just thinking about, like, what am I normally like? How often am I moving around, and what am I like today? And then, am I getting leaner? Is my weight stalling? Because I think even if it is like an actual metabolic rate going down, I can't really change that. You know, I can do my refeeds and hope it helps, but the only thing I can do is offset it. So it was more subjective. Like, I would decide to take a walk and think it's a good opportunity to catch up on continuing education, podcasts, stuff like that. And so I did that more subjectively.
Yeah, I think it's I'm really glad. I think it was James Krieger that really brought it to the forefront for me, because I know in my first prep, it was something that I was completely ignorant to the point at which I would gladly sit down and not worry about things. And I had to do horrible amounts of cardio to make up for the fact. So I think just the fact, obviously you're more than aware of it, but even more people are now aware of it. I don't think necessarily you need to get down to having the step tracker on there unless it's like an accountability tool. Whereas, you need to give yourself a talking to if you're being lazy. You kind of know it.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. You had Andrew Chappell on not too long ago.
Yeah.
And one thing we've seen in some of the data he's collected in the UK on bodybuilders, that pretty much everyone does cardio.
Yeah.
And I wonder if we put a step tracker on everyone and everyone just tried to do activity to prevent their steps from going down so low, if you'd see huge amounts of drop off of people doing cardio, because I think the reason people find like, oh, I dropped my calories low, but man, I'm still not losing fast enough. I got to do cardio. It's because of that. Our activity levels drop so much. We become so much more sedentary when we're not forced to be moving, that we see cardio as effective. And I think we ascribe, as is very common when we don't know why something, we ascribe explanations that may or may not be true physiologically for something once we observe something consistently. Because I will say, like, consistently, if you see bodybuilders who struggle to get lean and they didn't do cardio and they start doing cardio, they get leaner, because that was a big thing in the early 2000s, the 90s. People were all like, oh, I don't do cardio. And then a lot of the times people started doing cardio and they were able to get to stride and glutes. I think that's really primarily, it's nothing magic about like metabolism or fuel utilization or tapping into fat burning, et cetera, or enhancing mitochondria's ability to use fat for fuel, blah, blah, blah. No, I don't think it's anything like that. I think it's that it's offsetting your reductions in NEAT. And if you take care of that without cardio, then maybe you won't need cardio, because essentially you've done cardio, No,
yeah, so. I definitely think it's not that we'll talk too much about that podcast, but there's some really interesting questions that you end up having once you hear about what the elite are doing, and kind of, is it because of this or because of that? And that step element is really interesting to see if they would actually just end up not requiring the cardio if they were more aware of NEAT and things like that.
Absolutely.
And then we talked about refeeds. I don't know if I misheard the number of calories you brought up to, but what are your refeeds kind of looking like? Are they brought up to maintenance intake through carbohydrates, or how are you planning those?
Yeah, it's carbohydrate dominant. And it is right around where maintenance probably is. So for me at the moment, I'm running 3 days at 2,700 in a row. And yeah, they are, the fats do come up a little bit because I'm not anal retentive about just trying to drive carbohydrates up. And I do actually think there's probably some benefits to having a more holistic increase in total calories from multiple forms. Probably not as much protein, but everything else, fats and carbs. I don't think it should be. I do think it should be dominant in carbohydrate based on what we know. But I'm not worried about trying to keep fat intake really, really low. In fact, I wonder, your high days are also an opportunity to maybe shore up some micronutrient deficiencies that have been around. And for me, because I am a desk jockey and I just don't have that high of an energy expenditure, like my lowest low days got down to around 1,400, skirting right around there, maybe even slightly under, which isn't crazy if you think about it. Like 4 days at 1,400, 3 days at 2,700, I'm still clocking an average of about 10 kcals per pound or 22 kcals per kg. But those low days basically consist of protein and vegetables with like one or two pieces of low calorie fruit and like fish oil, so I've got my basics covered. But I think it's really difficult for someone who's, 81, 82 kilos consuming 1,400 calories, even of micronutrient dense foods, if it's a high protein diet, to not be running into micronutrient deficiencies. So I see those, 2,700 calorie days as an opportunity to eat, a rich variety of whole foods, including some foods that have fat in them and from different sources. So I can't put like a research study behind that statement. But I can say I think it's probably overly reductionist to be like, yeah, you need to keep your fat below 50 grams and drive your carbs up to 500. I don't know. Maybe like 65 grams of fat and the 400 to be a little better. Like if I had to guess, just to make sure that you can actually, eat an egg or something like that, stuff like that. So anyway, yeah, that's how the setup's been. The high days weren't as high, nor were they as frequent in the beginning. I was doing, 5 days at 1800 and then 2 days at like 23 to 2500.
Right.
And then as I was getting more depleted to make progress, and needing to suffer a little more to get the total deficit, I was needing to offset that more. And it did seem to make a difference. And I noticed I wasn't spilling over as much, even though I was adding another high day. So that, I don't know if that's changes in nutrient partitioning or just being able to see it better because I'm lower in body fat. The consequences of spillover are less obvious, but it was interesting. It did seem to match up with when that was probably a good time to do it.
And actually, because you talked about fat, in terms of minima, I think the muscle and strength pyramid, say 0.3 grams per pound is kind of like the general rule of thumb. Is that right? And then is that kind of what you take through a contest prep? Or if you do go under that, how long do you allow, like if you had a client or even yourself, how long do you allow yourself to go under that amount?
Yeah, that's like everyone, it's all of us is making up a minimum because we don't have enough research on fat. So people have speculated all over the place. And I think it just depends on whether you come from a bias of looking at fat as this nutrient you need, but not as important as carbohydrates and protein because hashtag sport performance kind of thing, or whether you come from the whole like health side of it and you're like, hey, carbohydrates are non-essential, but we need fruits and vegetables and fiber, but the rest are just, places to get calories you don't need. And then it's all about protein and fat. You see kind of these two different recommendations, like don't go below 1 gram per kg on that kind of health side of it, or don't go below like 0.5 grams per kg on the other side of it, which is kind of, the low end. So I think in my books, I put, right around what you said, like 0.25 grams per pound or 0.5 grams per kg is kind of the low end of where you typically not want to go below regardless for prep.
Right.
But with that said, I think for short-term periods, there's a low likelihood of consequence besides just being fucking hungry.
Yeah.
Dropping your fat very low, and it's a useful way to cut calories. So, when I'm clocking those 1400 calorie days, I'm not I haven't, that's another thing that's prep that's different is I haven't had target macros. I've just been making sure I hit a gram per pound of protein, and then I have a calorie target when I have targets. Okay. And because I know my habits aren't going to change that much. It's always going to be a moderate or low fat-ish approach, and with ample carbs. And I just don't see, I can't convince myself, at least with my specific individual needs, where I've never seen a difference playing with it multiple times in the off season and in prep, with the difference between a day where I'm at 30 grams of fat or 70 with the same calories, even in prep, I don't notice any difference. Maybe slight differences in like satiety or hunger or what I crave, but performance, no change. Sleep, no change. Libido, no change. Nothing that I can subjectively tell. And I can't justify it metabolically anyway. That's just not how the way things work. So those are like the extreme ends of it. But for the most part, I'm probably falling between 40 and 60 grams of fat a day. On a 1400 calorie day, though, it's more like 30 or 40.
Yeah.
But then it comes back up for the refeeds.
Cool. Yeah, really interesting. And then with the refeed approach, actually, that you've been taking, I know you kind of use those as data points for peak week and things like this. And
yes.
You obviously peaked for Hawaii. I'd be interested, and I think the listeners would be interested to hear what your approach to that was, whether or not what lessons you learned from it, and maybe you're going to take them into your future peaks.
Yeah. So peak week has typically not gone that well for me. There's a notorious story for hardcore longtime 3DMJ followers where in my show where my first show I won, where I got pro qualified in the INBA, at prejudging, I was actually down 1 point, and at the finals when they did the pose down, I won by 1 point. The judges changed it because I looked that much different from prejudging to finals. I had spilled over in the morning because I looked and appeared to both Brad and Jeff flat. And the night before he would loaded. So we loaded again, and then I just had this spilly look to me. So we've kind of learned, and I spill in different places. So I can be appearing flat in my upper body and spilled in my lower body. And it's a very stark difference. And what my hypothesis now is it has less to do with whether I'm actually full of glycogen or low on glycogen in certain muscle groups. And more so just that when I eat a lot of food, there's this transition time where I just look gross, or there's like this kind of filmy water retention that just has much more to do with just transporting nutrients, changes in sodium, changes in body water, and it's going to take some time for me to like pee and have it stabilize. And typically, and on a longer time period than most, so it's confused for being flat or spilled or full or what have you. I actually remember being on the phone with Lane Norton in 2009 after my third failed peak. And he was like, so were you flat or were you spilled over? And I was like, honestly, I was both. And I tried to describe it to him. I was like, does that make sense? And he paused for a second. And he went, no, like I could tell, and I would have been the same way. He didn't trust me as an athlete to be able to know what I was seeing. Okay, you're frustrated, you're dieted, you're crazy. We don't know if you were flat or spilled. So I guess I'm still flying in the dark kind of thing. But over the years, we've come to figure out that, we probably want to be manipulating less variables come game day. So I paid a lot of attention to how my body looked in relation to those 2 refeed days and then how many low days it took me to look good and clean up. Right. And I found that I looked good on day 1 of refeeds once I was lean. But I looked better after my whole refeed cycle was over and it had been a day or 2. So thinking about that and thinking how to play with it, 2 weeks out, what we did was instead of having 3 days at 2,700, we had days where I went higher than 27 on day 1, mid, and then lower. So it's still 3 days at 2,700, just distributed differently. And the last day was at, I think, 1,900. And I found, and then the theory was, look, if we kind of do this downward taper, I'll still get the same amount of glycogen stored, but I won't have as much of this nasty spill to clean up. And then we set it up so that my refeed schedule was shifted so that here in New Zealand, it's a Sunday, which is we're on the other side of the international date line. In the States, it would be a Saturday. I took the video of me posing 2 weeks out, and I looked really good. I looked hard, full, lean. And that was the 10 a.m., same time I'd be getting on stage in Hawaii, with the time difference, roughly, after those 3 days, with the day prior being 1,900. And I looked really good. I thought I could be a little bit fuller. So the only change we did the next week was instead of that first day being a little higher than 2,700, it was substantially higher. So I went to 3,600 calories. So I think, the first round, basically I took 2,700 and I kicked up 400 calories on the high day and the low day, just unevenly spread them like that. So I want to say it was 31. I can't remember. It was 29. It was at 29, 24, 19. I think it's what I did. So it was on average the same, but just downward sloping. And this time I just did the same thing, but I took the first day up to 36. So I went 36 and then the same numbers. And I looked bigger and fuller on stage than I did in those pictures, but I think just as tight. And I even have the pictures morning of the show where I look really dry and tight before I even had my first meal. I think all I'd had going into that was fluids to make sure I was peeing clear. So the metrics we had on game day, Berto wanted to see me piss and clear. And then I had a 400 to 500 calorie meal 2 hours before stage. Mm-hmm. And then I had sodium and water, and that's it. And then it wasn't a one format show. It wasn't just straight through, but it was such a small show that I was on stage at 10:45 and then 2:45. So it was a very short period. So then I just had another quick carbohydrate dominant 400 calorie meal as soon as I got off stage, and then did the sodium and water again. And I looked good the whole time, which is tough for me because typically at best I can keep myself just not totally flat. Our old strategy that we figured out in 2009 was just give them a couple hundred grams of carbs the day before, prevent him from being gross flat, and then at least he won't look worse than normal. And then in 2011, we got me looking good at finals, but not prejudging. So it was, but this time I looked my best that I had on stage at prejudging and finals, which is really all I could ask for.
Yeah.
Like I said, there's only 4 or 5 hours between the two stage outings, but hopefully in July, when I do these bigger shows, we can use that same strategy and probably just add in like another meal, because there would probably be another 2-3 hours on top of that between my 2 stage outings. So yeah.
Really cool. Really interesting to hear that it's taken, even for like the number of shows you've done, how many manipulations and trials and errors, and how you've kind of just got to a formula that's coming together now, which is kind of, I guess, actually, I'd be interested to hear, because obviously you've, as a whole, 3DMJ have coached tons of people to stage in the thousands probably. How is it very variable between people in terms of, do some people have it like you, and then other people are just like, you can peak them and they're just very predictable? And is there like more people like you, or more people who are more predictable, or is it just like a complete mix?
Yeah, I am probably like, if I was to give a statistics answer, like if there's the mean, like how peakable are you? How predictable is your body in response to nutrients? I'm probably like 2 standard deviations below the mean. So I'm of the more wacky.
Yeah.
However, that's definitely changed this season. Like, so I have these pictures that I sent to Berto in 2009 of my quads in the morning and my quads at night. And I shit you not, I had cross striations in the morning, and at night I had hints of separation.
Wow.
So it literally looked like 2 weeks out and 16 weeks out difference in the quads in the same day. And that's another big thing I learned, was that I was just crushing myself with hard cardio, and also just had a lot of life stress.
Right.
And I think I've handled my life stress better, and stress overall. I'm less neurotic of a bodybuilder, and not doing any cardio. And also, I don't have leg days per se, which we will probably have a whole 20 minutes or so to talk about training. But I don't thrash my legs to the point where they get that kind of fluid buildup and edema, which now I realize what it was. Like, we just thought I had to lose fat slower on my quads. But like, I think we're just so confused. Like, obviously I'm not gaining fat from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., but the variability in my quads, the fact that that's where they seem to spill over, and that's where I retain water and all that. It seemed like, just getting this guy's quads to show up, that's the gamble. And now it's so funny. Like, my quads can't not look good, And Berto still can't get over it. Every time I report in, he goes, I just can't get over the fact that I can see every muscle in your quadriceps right now. So anyway, I am definitely more finicky, but I don't appear to be this season. Now I'm much more closer to the kind of the normal person. So essentially the lesson was learn what I need to do for me to not make everything terrible. But that did take 3 seasons, which I don't think is too far off the standard.
Okay.
I think we can probably get there a little closer. Like, typically, if I get 2 or 3 shows with someone, I've probably nailed their peak by the 2nd or 3rd show, or at least made it so they look better on stage and they do some random time 2 weeks out. For me, it was, my 10th show, 3rd season, but I wasn't coached by 3DMJ in 2007. 3DMJ formed in 2009, and at that time we'd coached no one. So, I think the difference is now that our clients benefit from the collective experience of all of us, and we have coached over 1,000 people at this stage now. But so on average, I think this is a really useful thing for someone who's going to hire a coach and get on stage. No matter how good they are, I wouldn't expect your first peak to be as good as your 2nd or 3rd peak, just because it's a learning process. Yeah. Even if you run a trial like I did, man, the game day is different. The bodybuilding shows are notorious for you getting on stage at some time you didn't expect, typically too late. Yeah. You're going to be typically much more stressed out than you would be on a random day after a refeed where you tested a peak week and you're like, oh, that's great. You've got color on, you have to do your spray tan. You took a polygraph if you're competing in drug tested shows. Your division might change. You show up and you think you're going to be in a specific weight class, and they find out they're just going to split you into equal thirds. All this stuff, they throw curveballs at neurotic people who are dieted and even more neurotic than normal. And you're trying to remember and travel, and you're staying in a hotel, athlete meeting, all this stuff. Just the show itself, I think, makes people look worse. So I think experienced competitors have an advantage just because they're less rattled by that stuff. And it took me until probably my third or this fourth season to realize that I don't even think the food you eat on show day makes that much of a difference compared to other things. Like if you think about it, like how long does it take glycogen to store? You're damn sure the meal you ate 1 hour out isn't storing glycogen. The sodium might be affecting you. The fluid in that food's affecting you. It might be stabilizing your blood glucose so you can pose better on stage, but that's it. Like honestly, you could eat a 70% fat meal an hour before stage. It wouldn't make a difference, in my opinion, if the sodium and the fluids were there and there's enough just to stabilize your blood glucose, which can come from, protein. So just kind of knowing that and having confidence in it. I remember agonizing over the grams of carbs I got from rice cakes when I got on stage in 2009. And, think like, when do I need to have my sodium coach? Should it be now or 10 minutes from now? Should I do it after the pump up or before the pump up? And I'm trying to manage so many variables in my head, all that didn't matter. And now I was like, I should probably get in, I need to get a meal in this morning, and I need to I need to stay hydrated. I need to make sure that while I'm eating less than I normally do, that my sodium levels aren't too low. So let me throw back a half teaspoon of salt right before I get on stage and make my first meal salty, and that's it, so understanding that, I really like the process of getting someone looking right, more right as the days go.
Yeah.
If you can set up a peak week so that they're looking better as the show approaches. And like typically one of the tricks of the trade for me is if I can get them looking really good, but just slightly spilled over the night before, we're money on game day. And then we just have to maintain that look. And if they look really, really off after that and you didn't change anything and they didn't, go off plan and there wasn't some crazy time thing and they didn't forget to drink water, it probably just means then you need to work on stress management. That tells you something. Okay, this athlete needs to meditate when they wake up. They need to kind of separate themselves from the rest of the competitors, put their legs up and listen to some music, listen to some podcasts, and not think about the fact that they're getting on stage. And then their coach needs to just let them know, hey, take your headphones out, sweet, eat this and just walk around the building for a little bit. Are you cold? Here, put a sweatshirt on, that kind of thing. Tell them when to start pumping up and just kind of keep their head out of the game until they need to get on stage and they gain the experience so that doesn't become such a stressful process.
I love that, especially the game day approach in terms of it's just like try and treat it like any other day almost in some ways. I try and tell a lot of my clients in that you can't, if you've peaked badly, you can't sort it out on game day. Is going to be a tricky day to try and do anything. Like you said, you kind of want to be that ready beforehand. That's why it's peak week, not kind of like the peak day in that way. Yeah. So I think that's really valuable advice. And actually with you saying of went into your training, let's dig into that. So what's your split looking like, Eric?
Yeah. So I spent, actually legitimately a full year playing with different splits of having the same total number of sets per body part, but distributing them differently to see what I found was allowed me to improve performance, which I didn't see huge differences in except on a few movements. B, what left me feeling the most recovered or least recovered, what beat me up the most. C, what was subjectively hardest and easiest. How sore was I? How long did it take to recover? And when did my joints feel more or less beat up? And what I landed on, I really liked just an alternating upper lower. So I just do upper lower, upper lower, upper lower, and then take off days. I just had 1 to 2 a week that I was allowed myself to take. But I found that leg days are really trash me, even in the off season, even when I'm fat and happy. Like the prospect of doing squats, leg press, RDL, leg extensions, and leg curls in the same day, and maybe sometimes lunges on top of that to get to the requisite volume, that is really hard. And that's why leg days go down as the thing bodybuilders talk about. Like that's the real training day. Like, like pump your chest. This is Sparta kind of talk, And when I went to full body, knowing that for me personally, I need more upper body volume than lower because my lower body responds better. And I need more basically what it looks like is I was doing 5 upper body days with 1 or 2 lower body movements. Only one of them was a big compound. And all of a sudden, my recovery improved so much. I was able to handle things. And the only downside I found to doing the full body was that I could get elbow tendonitis if I didn't pay attention to what I did for my direct arm work. So if I did more neutral grip stuff, if I did BFR, if I spread it out throughout the week intelligently, and if I did more high reps and I wasn't doing like heavy curls or heavy push downs or like if I stayed away from things like skull crushers and some of the other things that put you at a weird position, then I was fine. And so I actually have stuck with, for over a year now, 5 full body sessions as my training, and only had to make very slight modifications for prep to kind of deal with the lethargy and the fatigue and just the poor recovery. So it's pretty unconventional. I've never trained this way. I've trained full body obviously for weightlifting and powerlifting, but full body for bodybuilding, I've really only done that. I sort of did it for a while when I was benching, no matter what I went to the gym, but sometimes it'd be like a leg day plus bench, but it wasn't truly full body. And this is now I'm actually setting things up for full body and have been for a year. And I really, really like it. And it's not for any of like, nonsense reductionist reasons like, well, because of the MPS response time period in advanced lifters. And therefore like, no, I'm not just muscle, right? I have to think about overall recovery and everything, but it's really allowed me to maintain performance. Walking into the gym where the only thing keeping me standing was, the 400 milligrams of caffeine I have because it's a low day and all I've had is, 40 grams of protein and 20 grams of carbs and 10 grams of fat. And it's been 6 hours into the day. And I have striated glutes. Like the prospect of going right, all I have today is 3 sets of leg press for lower body. Okay, I can do that. And then I can get on bench. And then I like bench,
right.
So that's a much different prospect, I think this probably wouldn't be the approach someone would need to take if they had to do a lot of volume for lower body. But for me, I have 3 sets of 3 squat patterns, 3 sets of leg extensions. And then for the other side, I've got 3 sets of leg curls, a glute specific movement for 3 sets, and then a hip hinge movement for 3 sets, and then another either glute or hamstring thing for 3 sets, and then 9 sets of calves to do per week. So splitting that up over 5 days, man, each day is just so much easier to handle. So that's been my training. And then I'm doing, 2 pushing and 2 pulling movements, and then some other accessory movement, whether it's a lateral raise, a face pull, or direct arm work every day. And it's been so much easier to maintain performance. Since the start officially of prep, I have actually lost 0 strength, which is pretty
amazing,
crazy to me.
Yeah.
I started at 88, 89. So, to be clear, when I was at my peak off-season weight of 100 kilos, I benched 165 for touch and go. Right now, I can bench 140 for touch and go. So that is a loss of strength, but relative strength hasn't gone down at all. And the drop from 89 to 81, I've lost no strength, which is pretty shocking to me. So it's clearly working, at least for me.
And that
works for me, bro, is the answer. Yeah.
Your anecdote is fine. We're doing AU. Yeah. AO even. AO. I've wanted to do that. So with the actually, just to clarify, full body, you are literally training like chest, back, hamstrings, and quads each and every single session.
So there are some days where a muscle group might not get hit. So for example, I think I hit quads on 4 days because I have 3 squat patterns. Let's see, I've got a leg press, I have a safety bar squat, I have a plate loaded power squat, and a leg extension I do on all different days. So there's one day where I only hit hamstrings and calves, but the other 4 days I hit quads. And then likewise, there's one day where I don't do any direct work for hamstrings. They get maybe slightly touched by a squat pattern.
Cool.
So yeah, there's a few days where something doesn't get hit. Like I don't have direct bicep or tricep work every day. I don't have direct rear delt every day, but I'm doing a row or a pull down and some type of chest press or fly or dip or a pullover, something that hits the chest every day. And yeah, I'm extending my elbow and flexing my elbow every day in some way or another. So yeah.
And so you're
almost everything gets in every day.
And you're undulating, obviously exercise selection's changing. I don't, like, just so people don't think you're kind of doing squats every single time you do. Obviously you talked about the different leg movements that you're doing. Same for upper body, I guess. And then I guess repetition ranges are changing a little bit as well.
Yeah, so to give you kind of the overall structure of the micro and mesos, I'm running 3 weeks of pushing, either trying to push load, push reps, or push towards a higher RPE on a set-by-set basis for each movement in the rep range that I selected for that mesocycle. I do that for 3 weeks, and then I take a deload. On the deload, which is my 4th week, I, depending on how beat up I feel, I will not necessarily do this if I don't think it's safe. But what I have been doing is doing 2 sets on each movement after warming up to do a low rep attempt for a new PR, and then a high rep kind of burnout new AMRAP PR for fun. I will take those two somewhere between a 9 to 10 RPE. So it's not technically an AMRAP. I might be able to get one more for kind of safety. But it drops my volume in slightly more than a third, because I'm not doing like 100 reps on the AMRAP, and the low reps are like 3 to 5 RMs. So I'm motivated to go in there. I get excited for the session. It's not those deloads where you go in and you're like, I actually feel weak on this deload. Maybe I needed it. No, it's because you can't get amped up for a set of 5 at 75% of 1RM. Like you're already unhappy about this whole week. So for me, I find I really like doing that. I don't think that works with some setups. Like you don't want to do 3 weeks of overreaching, then let's go for a PR. Like that doesn't make sense in some ways. But the way my training is set up, and which movements I selected on, it works just fine. But your mileage may vary, kind of thing. So anyway, so I have a 3 week basically acclimating to higher stress loads, 1 week deload, and then I do a block assessment on what I liked, what I didn't like, what I want to change, what movements are becoming too subjectively stressful. So right. For example, I was actually doing safety bar squats and front squats for a while, and I replaced the front squats with the plate loaded power squat, just because, man, keeping my back up and tight and focused and doing all the things you need to do multiple reps in the bodybuilding rep range for front squats was just mentally fatiguing. As an example, I was benching a couple times per week, and I replaced one of them with like a plate loaded converging press, so like a machine press, which was easier to do. So it came down to like mental focus. And there was one day where I noticed my elbow tendonitis was like, it cyclically goes and then it goes away by then the time I have to do the movements again, but it wasn't. And I think it's just because I wasn't recovering well. And on that day, I was doing weighted dips and tricep pushdowns. So I just pulled the tricep pushdowns, and I'm like, I have plenty of pressing. So small modifications like that. So I would say overall my volume has dropped from December by maybe 10 to 15%, but not by much, by kind of little tweaks like that. And most of the changes have been exercise selection to feel a little more manageable. As far as what I select for rep range and an RPE, it is normally what I think is appropriate for the movement. So certain movements really don't lend themselves to high reps or low reps. So like, for example, isolation movements are higher reps because of either joint strain or inability to keep form or attention on the target muscle. And then high risk, lower body, free weight compound movements, I might do more sets to offset the fact that I'm training outside of what is probably the effective rep range. So I'd rather do 5x5 at a 6 to 8 RPE than say 3x8 at an 8 to 10 RPE. Even though the load would be roughly the same, and I think the stimulus would as well, because I find that subjectively easier. You can keep better technical control of form, etc. Yeah, you got to rest. It takes a little longer, but I think it's worth the trade-off. So the undulations in reps, it's not that each day has its own rep focus. It's more like the movements have their own rep focus and their RPE combination, and they're on different days. And then depending on whether I think I can progress load week to week to week on an exercise, or whether I just don't have that kind of capacity for performance improvement, then I might, the second step would be, all right, can I increase reps on this movement? And if I don't think I do, then the third option for progression that I will do is I'll drop reps and increase load very slightly. So for example, bench press I find to be one of the hardest things to actually progress during prep. And like I said, I haven't lost any strength on bench, but I haven't progressed it at all.
Right.
So I'm doing all kinds of different rep combinations just to see, like, can I maintain what I did before? Can I do that again? Can I go close to failure but still get that? All right, so I'm kind of like holding the line on bench press because my butt's getting smaller and smaller, and it's more like a flat press every day and less of a powerlifting arch. But other movements I've been able to slowly progress. Like, for example, my dumbbell chest press. I've been working on getting 3 sets of 15 with, I think 45 kilos on dumbbell flat press. And I finally got that after doing like 15, 13, 12, 14, 14, 14, 15, 15, 14. God damn it. All right. Next week, 15, 15, 15. So little things like that have been how I've been progressing. And then I'll make changes to the exercise selection based on how long I've been doing a movement, how good it's feeling, simple desire to do something different. And then I will use some time-saving techniques and also volume-saving techniques on certain isolation movements. Like I'll do rest, pause, or drop sets on some arm work and some direct delt work, direct calf work, because I just get really mentally tired at the end of a session. And for me, doing 3 straight sets of preacher curls when I'm just fatigued after a full body session, it might be easier for me to do 3 drop sets and be like, look, it's going to be hard. I'm going to go to failure and it's going to be, kind of grindy, but I'll be done in 3 minutes, So I think that's or less. So some of those are all based around maintaining the subjective ease of the training while still getting the same total stimulus objectively.
Nice. Really interesting. I think people are going to really appreciate hearing that, and interesting to hear the full body split is working really productively, but I think why not? You've tried many things, and that's a great thing about experimenting. So really, really interesting. And then in terms of kind of future, what's up next for you, Eric? Like, how many weeks out are you from particular shows? This might come out and you might be even nearer to it, but when are the next shows, and what are you hoping for?
Right. So as of, I think it's Thursday, May 9th in the United States right now as we're recording this. So I am just about 2 months out from my next show, which is July 6th in Sacramento, California. That is the River City Classic INBF show. Which is another newer show that's been around, I think, a couple of years, but it's growing. It's got a great promoter. INBF does a great job with it. Bob and Tina are out in California, so they make sure all their affiliates and shows do really, really good. So I'm excited to do that one on the 6th. And then the big show, the Pro-Am, the Muscle Mayhem, on July 20th, that has been for 2 decades now, probably the biggest and best natural show in California. I'll be doing that one, and that's the first time I've been on that stage since 2009. And the last time I did that, I won the heavies. Jeff Alberts won the lights, and then we both got mopped up by Moji Alua in the overall. To be clear, though, Jeff placed behind Moji by 1 point, while I was I think a distant 3rd or 4th in the overall. But so that was cool. Last time I competed on stage with Jeff was 2009 at the show, and we're going to be doing that again. If I'm able to get my pro status the 2 weeks before on July 6th, if there's enough people in the show to award a pro card, and if I actually win the overall, I'll be getting literally on the pro stage with him, probably standing next to that guy for a few minutes before they decide to kick me to the outside. And if not, then at the very least, we'll be in the same show. I'll be in the amateur division. He'll be in the pros. And that'll be a lot of fun, and that'll be for the 10-year anniversary of 3DMJ. So
amazing.
Those are the big plans.
Yeah. So
we got a big 3DMJ get together all planned out in Sacramento to kind of celebrate the fact that we've been doing this thing since late 2009.
That's amazing, and you definitely should celebrate, because you guys have done. I mean, you transformed the bodybuilding industry and everything that we're doing. So I think, to see that happen is going to be a really exciting day.
That's very kind of you, man, and we're very grateful to have been able to have a positive impact, and we're going to keep trying to. So we're going to celebrate thinking of all the amazing people we've met and everyone else who's doing great work like yourself with Revive Stronger. So thank you.
So we'll wrap up there after it's a nice little ending. I think if people have further questions, maybe they can submit them somehow into the comments, and maybe we have to drag you back on at some point, Eric. I think probably we've made people think quite deeply about contest prep and the different things that go on. So I think that might be quite cool. But obviously, people want to learn more from 3DMJ. Hopefully by now they know where to head. But I don't know if you've got anything new coming out any new projects or anything.
Yeah, we just launched, for those who are fans of my books, The Muscle and Strength Pyramids. There's a really cool app that I partnered with, Gravitas. It's available on the iPhone, so Android users, be patient. But for those who have an iPhone, if you are in your early stages of your bodybuilding journey, you can actually run in-app guided with progression-based, like done for you, customized exercise selection, plateau fixes, analytics, everything just done right in front of you with videos of the 3DMJ coaches performing the lifts, tips and guidance from me in written form. You can run the novice bodybuilding program from the second edition of my books on Gravitas. So you can download the Gravitas app, purchase it in the app, or you can purchase it on the website. And you can find a link to that in my Instagram at Helms3DMJ. That's the newest kind of cool thing that I'm doing these days. But yeah, besides that, just like you said, go to 3dmusclejourney.com. Check out all our stuff.
That is really, really interesting, though. That's so cool that you're in an app now and people can actually do the muscle and strength pyramids via that. So, yeah, I think that's for people who are at that stage. I mean, I wish I had something like that to access. It's like a gold mine. So we'll make sure that's linked below. People can access that, and definitely follow Eric over on Instagram as well to keep an eye on all these shows and everything that's happening there. So thank you again, Eric, for coming on, and thank you guys for listening.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.